First of all, thank you very much for joining us today. We are very pleased. We have quite a good number of participants on this course. So looks like an exciting journey for everyone, and everyone is quite intrigued by the topic. I would like to welcome all of you today on behalf of GSUK to this very exciting and needful course on most demanding subject across all industries in all parts of the world. We were getting lots and lots of queries to run this course. So here we are today with you. GSUK has started this series of courses to enrich sustainability movement as an expert organization. We have been working and serving the industry for over 15 years with our head office in UK. We also have our offices in Pakistan, Bangladesh, MENA region, and presence in India and many other parts of the world. So the way we work is that we have this under the umbrella of GSUK. We are very much an organization which enables other industry professionals and companies to build on their sustainability frameworks and not only build on it, but actually deliver on it. So we are a very passionate organization on ensuring that everyone is on the same page and they are delivering on the compliance agenda. So we are a purpose-led organization. Our core focus is actually to deliver on international standards and compliance requirement under full ESG scope. We are very well versed with environment, social, labor, as well as governance and other financial domains. We work with over 100 consultants across the globe who are experts in various industries and present with very insightful credentials when it comes to their own subject area. So today we are very pleased to say that we have collaborated with our seasoned experts and consultants to talk about SBTi, Damien and Naveed. They will be covering a full science-based target initiative about its theory, about its implication, about what are the expectation, covering scope 1, 2, and 3. And it will be also touching base on how we align these under various other headers of ESG, GRI, and other reporting frameworks. The course is designed for basically meeting any requirements relating to identifying, measuring, and reporting on environmental targets. So it will be a very much of an integrated approach that our trainers will be following today. So I would like to welcome Damien Burton, who is our renowned energy and carbon expert. He is also a lecturer and academic serving as subject specialist. He have over 20 years of experience in carbon accounting and verification. His credentials involve working with various industries and renowned names like Holland and Barrett, Co-op Group, Glenforce, and he's also been very active on many professional forums and chaired energy group for Manchester Climate Change Partnership as well.
Thank you, Hannah.
Hi, Damien. And we are very fortunate to have Naveed Sheikh with us as well. He presents profound expertise in energy efficiency and management, and he have more than 15 years of experience in multiple sectors. His credentials include working with, again, very renowned names of the organization, for example, GSK, AstraZeneca, Hankins, EDF, Nissan Motors, etc. With this, I would like to formally initiate the course and hand over the floor to our subject experts. So hand over to you, Damien, Naveed. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah.
Naveed, you said a few words first, Naveed.
Yes, I can. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. And it's really exciting to see you all. And as Hannah explained earlier, this is need of the hour. So good to see you all. Basically, I'm a mechanical engineer working in industry as an energy consultant and efficiency expert for last 15 years. And I would say the subject is still the same. We are all trying to save energy, cost, and carbon. though there have been, I would say, some pressing changes, and of course changes on the other side, which is the change in the global warming effects worldwide. So I would say it is need of the hour. We have to actually accelerate our efforts to help our planet, and that's why we are here to help our clients to achieve what we think as a globally we should all be doing. So yeah, well, welcome everyone. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Naveed. And thank you, Henna. I hadn't really thought about it being 20 years of working in this space. I don't know if I'm pleased about that or not, actually, but you're right. It is 20 years. I need to have a cake this year, maybe. Right. Okay. So we're going to talk about science-based targets. Thank you, Naveed, for that. That's useful introduction. Can everybody see those slides now that I've put them up? Yeah. Can you see them, Naveed? Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should be able to see a mountain top.
I see that.
Yeah,
So have you?
we can't see slides yet.
I think, yeah, I think I can't. It did glimpse them in, but I think if you can reshare, maybe.
How's that? No. Let's see how we're going to do
Not
this.
yet. Not yet.
I still need to share screen, don't I? That's my main problem. 1 second. So share. Maybe if I put it on my big, let's decide which one we're going to do. Share screen. So that is my.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got the wrong view of this open. So let me just go back. Which one is it? Presenter view. I need to swap screen, swap displays. Okay, I think let me take that off there. Okay, I think that's good. So you guys can see all that now.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
we can see. Yeah.
Fab. Okay, so today, thank you, GSUK, sorry. We're going to have a masterclass on science-based targets. And I suppose it's quite a complex, initially to look at, it's quite a complex set of criteria and process that you have to go through. I think today is about simplifying that, because I think most people who've been through the process, either as a business or as a consultant working for a business, will look back afterwards on what they did and realize that actually, yeah, initially there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of documents to get through, but actually there is a fairly simple path to navigate through that and arrive at a target for your business or whatever organization you're working for. And I'm going to try to share with you what I've learned over the years about what is the most sort of simple way to get through that. So let's see how I get on. So today's masterclass, we're going to look at the Science-Based Target Initiative as it is, and science-based targets. We're going to look how it's changed from 10 years or so ago when it started and its global influence. We're going to go through the process step by step. I think this is the main part of the masterclass today. So the 6 stages to setting a science-based target, and whilst we don't have the time to go through it in the detail that you would need to do it if you're actually setting the target, we're going to go through it at a high level, and just so you can understand the kind of things that you need to start thinking about and what it looks like. And then towards the end, we're going to have a case study on Mahindra in India. We're going to use that as well as an opportunity to discuss some of the issues around how science-based targets help you to reduce risks and increase competitiveness in the business. And we're going to look about how that drives best practices in global supply chains. And we're also going to have a few questions at the end. So right, let's get stuck into it. So science-based targets. If you start setting a science-based target, you will become very familiar with this logo here. And you'll spend a lot of time on the science-based target website. So science-based targets initiative. So science-based targets are managed, organized, originate from the Science-Based Target Initiative. And the initiative is a global body that helps businesses and also financial institutions set credible, and I think that's an important word, set credible emissions reduction targets. And this is also the other important bit, in line with climate science. So like I was saying a moment ago, it was launched in 2015, so it's 10 years old. And they organized it to launch just ahead of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the big United Nations flagship treaty on climate change been agreed and ratified. We'll come back to that shortly. But what was the motivation behind science-based targets? Well, SBTi, Science-Based Target Initiative, emerged from the We Mean Business Coalition. It still exists and it's going strong, but that's where it emerged from. And that We Mean Business Coalition is I suppose it's a non-profit, it's a global non-profit organization. And the whole premise of We Mean Business Coalition is to mobilize the private sector into doing something about reducing carbon. And they look to encourage the private sector to take bolder action on climate change and accelerate the transition to a more resilient, low carbon, net zero economy. And We Mean Business Coalition came together with the CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, as they used to be called, the World Resources Institute, World Wildlife Fund, and who else was it? The United Nations Global Compact. And because they could see three things, really, they could see that there was a gap that needed to be filled. And before 2015, they realized that, and I think this is the main thing really, is that companies were setting voluntary climate targets that were inconsistent, that were unambitious in certain situations, and they were not linked to science. And I certainly have been an employee of organizations that were doing that, and was probably I am probably guilty of doing that as well myself. Science-Based Target Initiative could see that was a gap that needed to be filled, and a lot of companies were doing that not because out of any ill will, but because they didn't really know any better. There wasn't the resource out there to enable them to set a coherent target. They didn't really know what they were doing. So they recognized the demand. That was the second thing. They recognized that there was the demand out there. There was and also there was a demand coming from the other side as well. So there was a growing pressure from investors, from regulators, and from wider civil society for credible corporate climate action. And there was no vehicle as such for target setting that existed. And the third thing that the group, that the coalition there of partners realized was that there was not enough science behind the targets that were being set. So people would say, I'm going to set a 50% reduction target for 10 years from now. Why would you say that? And it sounds good. It looks good on a corporate magazine, but does it actually really mean anything? And is it the correct level of target setting for your organization? Well, they didn't know. So with the emerging Paris Agreement very close to hand and about to come to being, they realize that now is a chance to do it and apply some science to it. So yeah, it's a global collaboration. It's a standalone entity, and it's got a single headquarters, but it operates through its partner organizations. So if you ever have any engagement with SBTi, you'll find that their staff tend to be based at the CDP or the World Resources Institute. And yes, they do have a secretariat who are based in those organizations, but you'll find that your dealings with them are mainly online, through emails, occasionally by telephone. They prefer not to, though, I've noticed. But yeah, that's a little background to the partnership around there. So let's talk now about what a science-based target. What is a science-based target? Because I mean, we talk about it all the time. Well, I certainly do. But what does it actually mean? So it's I suppose at its heart, a science-based target is a corporate climate goal that specifies how much and how quickly a company must reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to align with climate science. And then to become science-based, they have to be reviewed and approved by the Science Based Target Initiative. So that's a big part of this, is you have a whole tranche of resources to be able to set the targets yourself in your organization. But the next crucial bit is that it's approved and reviewed by the Science Based Target Initiative. So what do the Science Based Target Initiative want from a target? Well, they want it to be ambitious. So we talked about the Paris Agreement. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later. But they want it to be aligned with that. They want it to be time bound. So instead of putting something that's going to happen in the distant future, they'll ask you to put specific times on it. We've talked about it being a science aligned. Well, it's got to be science aligned. We'll talk about that more in a little while as well. It's got to be comprehensive. So this is where we get into greenhouse gas accounting a little bit. It has to cover the majority of your scope 1 and 2 emissions, and if relevant, your scope 3 emissions. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And it has to be publicly disclosed and then tracked. So you have, as a minimum, you have to be reporting on it every year, how you're getting on with delivering on that goal. And I suppose it differs from previous target set arrangements in terms of what you can see on the screen there. It's a clear, actionable path, and it's aligned with the Paris Agreement. Those are crucial things. So let's have a little look about what the Paris Agreement is, or was. Well, it's still live. But back in 2015, this was the document that got published. Those of you who were involved in this sector back then will remember this was big news back then. It's not a very long document. It's only about 26 pages long. But this is the key sentence, I suppose, that informs what we're doing in terms of science-based targets. So this was the aspiration. I suppose this is probably the key sentence in the entire document, actually. So with all of the climate models that the world had at its hands in 2015 and the years that preceded it, we realized that global temperatures needed to be kept well below 2 degrees C, above pre-industrial levels. But we also realized that the preference would really be to keep it below 1.5 degrees C. And that I won't go into the finer points of climate science now, but 2 degrees C was okay, but not really great. But 1.5 degrees C was essentially, the world was saying we can work with this. But obviously the difference between 2 degrees C and 1.5 degrees C in terms of work that has to be done is significant, is huge, in fact. And so aligning targets to that 2 and increasing the 1.5 degrees C levels became crucial to what a science-based target was all about. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion now about what science-based actually means, because we've talked about what it is and what the target setting is all about and the drivers behind it. But what do they mean when they say science-based? Well, before we met last week, I was actually thinking about this myself, and I thought I know what this means, but I need to really write this down and figure out what it actually and define what it actually means. And I think it means 4 main things. So the first thing is that it's consistent with global carbon budgets. So we know as a world how much carbon we can emit to stay below 2 degrees C, and we know how much we can emit to stay below 1.5 degrees C. So that is the total amount. The carbon budget is the total amount of carbon that can still be emitted while staying within those limits. It's finite. And science-based targets distribute that global budget across different sectors and different countries and different companies. That's how it works. So everybody gets a little slice of the cake that they're able to emit up to, but no more. And a science-based target sets your target to match that. The second thing that science-based target must meet, the second criteria, is that it uses climate model pathways. So that kind of overlaps with what we just said as well. But it follows the official pathway models that the global community, the United Nations, use, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change use to understand climate science and climate risk. It uses those climate models to figure out what is the slice of the cake that individual companies can take. The third thing is it reflects fair sectoral contributions. So within science-based target, each sector has its own pathway. So if you work in power generation or cement manufacturing or aviation, let's say, each sector has its own pathway based on the technological potential and the emissions profile of that particular sector. So some sectors will find it easier to reduce. Some sectors will find it easier to reduce at a faster speed, and some it will be the opposite for. So science-based targets takes a fair view of that and allocates the target accordingly. And also the fourth thing, that's a criteria around it being science-based, is that it avoids relying heavily on offsets. If you work as a consultant in this space, your clients are often trying to avoid doing too much work by buying offsets instead. So science-based targets very much encourages you to focus on real emissions reductions of a company's own emissions and within its value chain. It's crucial, that bit. It doesn't say you can't use offsets, but it really encourages you to limit those, and only after you've made the deep emissions cuts and those have been achieved. So I wanted to show you next, and I'll bring the next slide up, what the global emissions pathways look like, because this is about as sciencey as I'm going to get today. So don't worry too much, everybody. So this is where the global science currently stands, if you like. And I've taken this graph. This is a global graph. Global greenhouse gas emissions are there on the left in gigatons of carbon, and the date range is there along the bottom. And so you can see 2025 there in the middle. So the little grey line to the left of 2025 is a historical global emissions. So even despite our best efforts, you can see it creeping up. There's a little blip there you can see during the COVID period, but you can see that still just creeping up. And this graph is from the, you may have heard of this, is from the UK's Climate Change Committee, and it's from their 7th carbon budget report. They are required to report statutorily from time to time on this, and they advise the UK government on what the global carbon budget is, but also what the national is. So at the very top there, you can see a red line. That is current policies that we have globally for reducing carbon emissions. This is business as usual. Further down, you've got the blue and the brown lines. Now, the blue and the brown lines come out of the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement. They're called NDCs there. They mean nationally determined contributions. So every country that's a signatory to the Paris Accord, Paris Agreement, has agreed to, on a a nationally determined contribution. These are climate change action plans which every country has agreed to. You can imagine these are subject to intense negotiations. When there's two there's an unconditional one and conditional. So when targets are dependent on external financial support, these are called conditional. So the brown ones, so they need a bit more money to help them get there. And they're unconditional where there's no extra money needed. And then we're getting into the bit that we've just been talking about. So the 2 degrees C and the 1.5 degrees C that are related to the Paris Accord. Well, you can see those in the yellow lines and the green lines. And it's those sort of pathways that the global economy needs to take in terms of emissions to meet either a 2 degrees C or a 1.5 degrees C. And so you can see that a science-based target will align your business with meeting one of the yellow ones, one of the green ones, depending on which type of target you choose. Either or, both of these require some serious, rapid, far-reaching transitions in energy consumption and production, in land use, or what else, buildings, transport, industrial systems, you name it, the entire global economy. And you know, I mean, in terms of scale, these are transitions which are very much unprecedented, and so that's why science-based targets are required to enable us to actually put some targets in place that have a realistic chance of meeting that. Okay, hope everyone's okay so far with that. That's just about the end of the science. So we're going to have a look at target setting shortly, but we're just going to have a look at a few recent trends in science-based targets. Just a few graphs actually from science-based targets themselves. So this is a target. This is a table showing the number of organisations, companies that have submitted and have had approved science-based targets since 2015. So you can see it started off tiny. There's just 10 in the first year. But I was going to say last year. It's not last year. It's 2023 because that's the latest data we have from SBTi. Over 4,000 businesses. So if you add all those up, you're around about 8,000, 8,500 companies with approved targets. There's a larger number with companies that have also pledged to set them. But yeah, 8,000 globally. And it's a really interesting mix actually where they're from. So geographically, it's all over the world, which is great to see. For the second year running, Japan actually was the country with the highest number of companies setting a science-based target. I looked up the numbers before this masterclass, and I found out that there was a 520% increase in the number of organisations in India setting targets in 2023 compared to 2022. So India is going berserk with it. And in fact, Asia as a whole saw one of the greatest proportional growths in the number of organisations starting to take on science-based targets. So I had a look into some more detail around that. Actually, 741 companies headquartered in Asia alone that set a science-based target in 2023. So this is not particularly, it's still small, but it's not unprecedented and not unusual now.
Yeah.
Go on, Naveed, do you want to say something?
No, I was just nodding, saying you're right. Yeah, you can see phenomenal increase, and especially Europe dominating as you would expect. But definitely Asia is creeping up, as you said.
Yeah, 3 times as many in 2023 than compared to in 2022 in Asia alone. And that's 20. I think it's on the table on the picture there. 27% of all companies with targets and verified targets, validated targets are in Asia. So that is good to see. And then here's a little trend about the type of organisation. So we can see corporates have been steadily plugging away there. But clearly the story here is about SMEs. And you can see the real ramping up at the start of the decade. Well, this reflects that back then, and we'll talk about this in a little bit of detail as well, Science-Based Target Initiative set out an SME only pathway, because the corporate pathway is complex and it's just not really set up for smaller businesses. So they realized this and they set up a smaller and much cheaper route for SMEs to get a science-based target. We'll talk about that in a little while. I think half of these companies are services and manufacturing. And in that last year, 2023, the biggest growth areas were biotech, were health, and pharmaceutical. They were the big growth areas in 2023. So now we're gonna pivot away, and this is probably the main bit of the masterclass. We're gonna start talking now about the 6 steps that there are to set an SBTi target. These aren't my steps. These are the steps that SBTi publishes. This is the language they use, the terms that they use, and we're going to go through them step by step. If you're setting a target yourself and you're getting involved and you're getting your hands dirty in setting a target for an organization or within your own organization, this is the bit where it starts to get a bit technical, and where you have to start reading documents and making decisions about what route you're going to go down through the SBTi process. And yeah, you're going to need to factor in some time and some resource in the organization in order to do this. So I've attempted to make this bit sort of the most simple overview I can, but also keep enough detail so that you've got some idea about what it actually means. So let's get started. When I made this slide, I kind of smiled a little bit, because this is how everything starts these days, isn't it? With an email and a password. But recently, and this is the main submission site. If you look at the web address there, the SBTiservices.com, it's relatively new, that site. They didn't have that until recently. But the first process is to register for an account using the SBTi services validation portal. So this is the bit where you're going to get used to coming back on here, accessing your portal, accessing the documentation that's in there, filling stuff in, coming away with some questions, coming back and answering them. But yeah, this is the place where you can find all the resources. Some great, I have to say, whilst at times it can be quite complicated, it's really comprehensive, the documentation that they've put together. And so nearly every scenario that you can think of that your business faces, there's going to be an answer within the SBTi services website into how to address that particular issue or query that you may have. This first section, though, is about just actually is a registration step to confirm whether you're actually eligible to make a commitment and set some targets. And so it helps the SBTi at this point decide whether you're classified as an SME or whether you're classified as a financial institution. You saw that on the previous graph, or as a corporate. There's different routes for everybody, and they want to use this part to figure out where you fit. So you just go in here, you create an account as you would in any other sort of website. It's all confirmed, and then you've got to complete the company registration form. So there's a series of company details to confirm your eligibility, the application route, and there is a registrations manual which we'll find in here. So I have to say most of it's self-explanatory. Names, addresses, contact details, company registration numbers, tax numbers, all of that sort of stuff that you can imagine. It's quite exhaustive, so there may be you have to bring other colleagues in. You can set 10 key contacts at this point, and one of these has got to be an executive level contact from the organization who's setting the target. So you need somebody at the top of the business who's going to be on board with this and who's going to champion the target setting submission. So then you submit the registration, and you can track the status of your registration in the validation portal. So there is a little bit of a wait at this point where it goes into the SBTi. They look at it, and they will confirm your eligibility status or query it if need be, and then you can move on to the next stage. So next stage is going to be about committing. So this is about telling the world that you're going to set a science-based target. It is optional this stage, but I find with my clients that they want to tell everybody that they're setting a science-based target. So you can imagine there's lots of posts on LinkedIn at this point. There's lots of company emails that go out. It's as good as a tool internally as it is externally. So it may be that if it's a large organization, you've got lots of employees that don't know that you're going to do this, and they might want to know. Yeah. You might be trying to hire people, who want to work for a company that has set, proper targets. Well, now you can tell them that you're planning to do it. And obviously you might want to tell, and we could keep coming back to this, you might want to tell your supply chain, your customers, your clients about this as well. And also, your competitors as well. That's a big driver, I've noticed. Trying to set an SBTi target before your big competitors in that space is a big incentive. SMEs are not really eligible to set commitments, so they will go straight to the next stage. But that doesn't mean you can't. This is commitment, an official commitment. It doesn't mean you can't tell the world as an SME that you are committing to do it. There's a policy on the tape on there. This is the first of the documents we're gonna sort of become a little bit familiar with. I'm just showing you the cover. This will explain what setting a commitment is all about and what you've agreed to. The main thing that setting a commitment under SBTi means is that you have got 2 years, 24 months from the point that you make your commitment to develop and submit your target to the SBTi for validation. SBTi will encourage you to do it sooner, so the sooner you can do it, the better. But the clock is ticking at that point, really, for two years, or else it'll ask you to start again. That's plenty of time, though, to set a science-based target. You don't really need 2 years to do it, but it's plenty of time to do it, in my experience. So yeah, there's a great external and internal communications opportunity at this point. And then once you have been recognised, you will start to see your name mentioned on the target dashboard that SBTi have on their website. And you'll also see your name mentioned in other partner websites, like the We Mean Business Coalition. So let's have a quick look at what this looks like on the Science-Based Target website there. So this is just the very first page of the target dashboard. It's alphabetical, so these are the first ones that are on there. This was live a few days ago. Took a screenshot of it. So you can see there at the top, the Alexandria Company for Industrial Packages in Egypt. They've set their targets and they're an SME. And if you want to click over on the right-hand side there, you can view more about what their targets are all about. Further down, the brown one, the committed one, the Danish one there in Denmark, they've committed to do it. So they're a corporate and they've set themselves, they've got their clock is ticking for 2 years now to bring their target together, submit it and get it validated. And as time goes by, that will change from brown to green, and you'll be able to have a look at what they're planning to do and look into their company in more detail and what all their targets are all about. So anyone can come in. This is open to the public. Third parties can come and have a look at what your plans are, and all of your target setting information will be held here at some point too in the future. And yeah, we just talked about the places where it will be. We talked about the We Mean Business Coalition before, the original organization that got it started, and also UN Global Compact there. There's just a couple of screenshots here of their websites. This is the kind of organizations where you'll see, your name and mentioned, and you'll be automatically enrolled as well in some of their initiatives that are aligned with science-based targets. So they won't automatically ask you to do something more. You're automatically going to deliver on those things if you set a science-based target. So yeah, so you can use it at this point. You're communicating with everybody, and you can really use this opportunity to engage with all sorts of organizations to help you deliver ultimately on your science-based targets, because there's quite a lot of partnership work out there, especially if you've got a lot of scope 3 emissions. You're going to need your value chain, your customers, your clients, your suppliers to work with you to help you deliver those targets. Right, this is probably the main bit of the whole thing, is the development stage. So you've told everybody you're going to do it, your name's on the website, everyone's very excited. Now we've got to actually do some work. So developing the target, there are several stages to it. Those of you who have ever measured your greenhouse gas footprint will know this image well. The people, some of whom have done this and have been doing this for years, maybe not done this before, maybe you've started to think about it, a big range. So calculating a greenhouse gas inventory brings together all of the emissions across your entire organization into one place and calculates them into a total. That is your greenhouse gas inventory. This is greenhouse gases are separated into 3 different scopes: scope 1, 2, and 3. Sorry if some of you have heard this before. I won't labour the point. So scope 1 emissions, and science-based targets typically cover scope 1, 2, and scope 3. So this is why it's important. Scope 1 emissions are there in the middle. So they are direct emissions from assets that are owned or controlled by your organization. So that might be where it's got company vehicles there and businesses and actual facilities. So that might be things like fuels, natural gas, diesel, petrol. Scope 2 emissions are emissions from electricity, mostly electricity. I mean, it is also any steam or heat or cooling that you buy. We tend to see, for most people, that tends to be electricity, though. And you'll notice these two are called, your scope 2 and 3 are indirect, because you're not actually burning or emitting that carbon or those greenhouse gases yourself, unlike you are in scope 1. Someone else is doing it, and that's why they're called indirect. You're using that energy. And scope 3 are indirect emissions from your value chain. And for lots of companies, most companies, this is often where most of your wider emissions are. So this is things like purchased goods. You can see all of them. There's 15 different categories there. We won't go into them in detail. Purchased goods and services, capital goods, transport, third-party transport, freighting, business transport that you might use, product use. There's all sorts of different things in there. Recommend that you have a look at that and familiarize yourself with that. And this can sometimes be quite a shock sometimes for clients to realize how much of their emissions are in these other organizations. So scope 1 and 2 emissions are your own emissions. Scope 3 emissions are in your value chain. Your scope 3 emissions are someone else's scope 1 and 2 emissions. So it's a group approach that we need to take here. Everybody's got to move along together. So yeah, you'll need to establish an emissions inventory to do that. So I said this is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. That was a little image from inside the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Again, this is another website, ghgprotocol.org, where you can familiarize yourself with how to develop a greenhouse gas inventory. This is a copy of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol there. That's the global standard for measuring, managing, and reporting greenhouse gas emissions. It's the go-to standard now. I suppose about 15, 20 years ago, there was a few different options, but this is the one that has sort of come from the pack, if you like, and is now the go-to standard. And it's now internationally recognized around accounting and reporting frameworks as being the one that all businesses, governments, other organizations, you name it, use this. But today I'm going to stop talking about greenhouse gas inventories there, because it's not about that. But this is today, but it is an important part of it, because you can't set a target unless you know what your actual emissions are. So I said this would be document heavy, and I'm afraid this bit is a little bit, but this is where it really starts in terms of the development part of your setting your target. But like I said before, SBTi have developed some really useful paperwork around this. And this is the starting point. So I think if you take nothing else away from today, my advice would be to go onto the SBTi website and get this Getting Started guide. Download that and start to read through that. It's not particularly long, but it's an overview of the target development process. And you can see this is one of the pages within it. And it's quite handy about how there's quite a lot of decision trees as there is here. So you start to ask yourself, and these are available in different languages. This is the English one, obviously, but these documents are published in different languages as well. And you can work through your different, your own organization or an organization that you're working for, and figure out what's important to you, and how you're going to set your target and which target setting route you need to go down. And there's so many other resources in there. Sometimes it actually feels a little bit overwhelming, but they're all linked, so you can then follow through to the different resources that are in there. And there are resources in the target setting guidance is for everybody in here, for corporates, financial organizations, and SMEs. But you can see, even just by looking at the decision tree there on the right of the slide, that there are different routes for SMEs, different resources for SMEs. We'll talk about SMEs more in a little while, actually. So yeah, would recommend getting started here. But now I'm going to just talk about the two, I suppose, the traditional and most, I'm saying the traditional route for setting a target is around the corporate route. Although, having said that, my that graph that we looked at 5 minutes ago would suggest otherwise. The SMEs are taking over in terms of SBTi. But the focus of SBTi, probably until SMEs took the lead, was around corporate. So alongside the Getting Started guide, I just wanted to talk to you about these two documents, which are super important. There's loads of documents in there, but these ones are important. So we've got the corporate near-term criteria ones on the left, and we've got the net zero standard on the right. So these outline the requirements and documentation that you need to have in place to have your targets validated. So when you're actually on the web page, the portal before that we saw where you logged in, you'll fill all the documentation in for setting your target on there. But it's going to be important that you have these documents to hand with you to understand what some of the questions might be. And so you might be asked about certain aspects of your scope 3 emissions, for example, and it might be something that you've not really looked at before or don't really understand what the question means. Well, this is the point where you would come to these documents and get stuck into there and understand what the questions actually mean. And it's full of good, there's good glossaries in there. It's all very clearly put together, and you can work out any of the questions that you might have by using these documents. So you want to review these as well to help you guys determine if you've got any sector-specific requirements to apply to the company. So we talked about that before, about how targets, one of the criteria is that it's got to be sector-specific. Well, this is also automatically will put you in the right box, if you like, for making sure that your target is developed so that it hits the right sector. So you might have two companies that have the same turnover, that have the same number of staff, that maybe have the same emissions in their inventory, but if they're in two different sectors, they might have very different science-based targets at the end that come out of the system because they're in different sectors. And there is also there's a financial sector one of these as well. we talked about SMEs before on the graph. How does their route differ from the corporate target validation route? It's a lot easier. We'll talk about what SBTi consider to be an SME in a moment. There's a lot of off-the-shelf, ready-made targets, if you like, already prepared by SBTi specifically for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. So it can be a lot lighter touch, and is probably the reason why we see more SMEs now than there are corporates, because the process is that much easier. But if you're over a certain size, etc., you have no choice but to go down the corporate route. So yeah, let me think what we're going to talk about next. I mean, SMEs can use the corporate route. They can go down that route, but they don't have to. So these two documents also refer to two different routes as well, or two different targets that you can set. And I've just outlined these on the next slide about what actually they look like. I mean, this is very high level. So on the left, you've got the corporate standard, and on the right, there's net zero standard. Corporate standard, the focus of that is near term. So that's usually, I mean, it says a bit further down, 5 to 10 years. But its focus is on making deep greenhouse gas reductions sooner rather than later. Whereas a net zero standard focuses more on wider global net zero standards, which often have a 2050 target. The corporate standard focuses more on your traditional scope 1s, 2 and scope 3s that are relevant to your organization. Net zero standard is the same, but it also talks about removals. When I say removals, it means offsets. But like I said before, offsets is the very last thing that you need to be considering. And that's why net zero is net zero. Anything that's left over, it effectively gets neutralized by carbon offsets. The time frame we just talked about. For the corporate standard, you can't use offsets to meet any targets you have, but net zero standard you can for residual emissions. That's got to be less than 10% of your footprint. So you're not really let off the hook by the net zero standard. It's very, very, it's got much stricter criteria to avoid businesses just buying a bunch of carbon credits in the year 2049 and saying that they've done it. So yeah, you can get a little contrast there of the two standards. Next, I want to talk to you about the SME route in a little bit more detail. So, what does an SME actually? What do the SBTi consider an SME to actually be? Because there are different definitions of SMEs depending on where you are in the world. So this is the SME definition for SBTi. You've got to have less than 10,000 tons of carbon across your scope 1 and your scope 2 emissions. So this is why you need to have a greenhouse gas inventory, so you know what your carbon emissions are. You can't be in the financial institutions or oil and gas sectors. They've got different requirements on them. You're not required to set targets using the sector-specific criteria. So there are different sectors that we talked about before. So we talked about cement, didn't we? We talked about power generation. If you're in one of those, or iron and steel, if you're in one of those sectors, there's quite a lot actually, which again are all set out on the website. You'll know if you're required to set one in the specific, and in which case you can't go through the SME route. And if you're a subsidiary, the last one there, if you're a subsidiary of a parent company who would come under the corporate validation route, if they were setting an SBTi, well, you're not allowed to do the SME route. You've got to go and do the corporate route. And then you might recognize some of the last 4 bullet points. You've got to have less than 250 employees, less than 50 million euros turnover, less than 25 million euro in business assets. And the last one is you're not in a mandatory flag sector. So flag refers to forestry, land and agriculture. It's an acronym for forestry, land and agriculture. And the reason why you're not you can't go down that route if you're in one of those sectors is because those sectors have got some very specific sustainability standards. And SMEs in those sectors have got a lot of criteria that they've got to meet, demonstrate their commitment to different sustainability and compliance within sector-specific guidelines in there. And so sectors that are in flag would be forestry, timber, pulp and paper, rubber. You've got food production, so you've got agricultural production, but you've also got animals. Processing, so food and drink processing, food and drink retailing, interestingly, and also tobacco. So those are the ones that would stop you from being in an SME route. So there's actually quite a lot that could stop you. So what I noticed from going into the SBTi website was that it wasn't very easy to actually figure out where the tools were for actually setting a target. So I went and I got some of my own tools, that SBTi tools that I've already got copies of. And I'm just going to quickly show you those. This is probably the bit that most people are really interested in. How do you actually set the target? So the SBTi provide, it comes down to Excel, would you believe it? So it comes down to Microsoft Excel. After all of this, it comes down to Microsoft Excel. And depending on which sector you're in and the size of the organization, you download a specific Excel sheet and you put your emissions inventory details into that, and it will generate a target for you. So let's have a quick look at these. I've got a couple of pages on this. So here we are. Here's the here's one of the science-based target setting tool I've used in the past. So you would populate this with different criteria that you're setting a target for. So you put your scope 1 emissions in there, you put your scope 2 emissions in there. There's a separate one of these for scope 3 emissions. The type of target you want to set, and other criteria around what the business is like. You put your base year information in there. And then what happens is that the tool then spits out your target in terms of a glide path. And this looks like this. So like I say, this is for scope 1 and 2. There's a similar thing for scope 3, but it looks the same. And so you can see a lot using this graph what your targets are for your particular organization based on very specific information that you put in about your target. Now we can start to see what we're actually going to have to do if we're going to meet a science-based target. And so for this particular organization with their emissions, what have they got? 1,700 tons of scope 1 emission, 1,000 tons of scope 2. So they're not a huge organization, but they're not tiny either. They've got to meet a 50.4% reduction actually in both scopes, and they've set a target year of 2032. So they set a 10-year target. It's the near-term target that we were talking about in the previous slides. And so they can use this glide path then to figure out what they've got to do over the next 10 years in terms of scope 1, in terms of scope 2. You start to figure out, okay, so how are we going to do that? You know, you can work out what your year-on-year target, year-on-year reduction is going to be. We've got to find whatever it is, about 100 tons of carbon every year, maybe 125 tons of carbon every year. How are we going to do that? Are we going to do it near term? Are we going to do a big reduction near term? You know, are we going to invest in a lot of solar panels initially and get these scope 2 emissions right down and meet the target maybe after year 2? Or are we going to do more incremental things as we go along the scope 2 target? Are we going to change how we manage processes in the building? Are we going to slowly change our assets? Are we going to slowly change how we switch our lighting, our heating, our ventilation, whatever that may be? And are we going to just invest slowly over time and meet that target later? SBTi would encourage you to try and hit your target early, but it depends on what the business imperative, how you can invest, what the appetite is, stakeholders. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you would invest more slowly, more quickly, whatever. And you can see this company here. I mean, they're reducing their emissions. They've got to reduce their emissions at a slightly faster pace, only just slightly faster for their Scope 1 targets. So what are they going to do with the fuels that their company fleet uses? Or how are we going to get diesel? We're going to switch to biofuels. Are we going to switch to electric vehicles? Are we going to change the way that we actually transport things entirely and just use less transport? Are we going to use, well, how do we use natural gas in the business? Is it used for heating, space heating, say? Or is it used for actually production? Is it used for making plastics or whatever? And are we going to change the way that we actually produce our products and use less natural gas? And can we do that quickly, or is it going to take us longer? So you can see how a target will then look, and then how, once you've set the target, what that actually means, because now you've set the target and you can see what it actually looks like. Well, then that opens up a whole suite of extra questions about how we're actually going to meet it. Okay, next slide. So that I'm going to stop talking about the design of the target now, but there's a lot to that last bit, that section 3. There's a lot of people in the business who will have to be involved in that, in understanding what you can actually do and what targets is realistic for you. And you've got to then ask yourself, well, can we actually meet that target? And so there'll be a lot of interesting conversations looking at this graph. This is the bit that, you end up taking to a board meeting and saying, this is what we've got to do. And then people sometimes, you can meet a lot of resistance at this point because, an executive team will suddenly realize, oh, hold on a minute, we're going to have to start really doing something now if we're going to meet this target. Before we could just talk about it and put some nice press releases out. This means we actually have to invest or do something. And so this really just is a really useful tool to drive conversation and make some action happen. And also it's a really great tool if you're a consultant or working in a business, because it's not something that you've just come up with yourself by magic. This is aligned to what needs to be done globally for your business to play its part in meeting the aspirations of the Paris Agreement. So it's not crazy science or something that someone's come up with in their bedroom. This is real. This is a genuine, credible target that the business now has to try and figure out how it's going to deliver. So next bit is the submission. So you want to get your target validated now and published on the Science Based Target website. Well, you've got to now submit it. So you press the green button and off it goes, and you can do that directly in the portal. So all the tools, all the paperwork is all available on there. And at this point, Science Based Target asks for your bank details because they want to charge you, because it isn't free. Although we'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, you've got to get the credit card out now, or you've got to put the details in for whoever's going to pay for it and sign off the terms and conditions. So as you put the submission in, you'll get updates as you go along. The last one I did was, we've submitted it in April, and we were told within a few days that we would get it. It would get considered in September. So that's about 6 months. So you just wait, and you'll be given a time and a date by which you will either get a phone call or an email, and the phone call or the email will describe any queries that they have. They'll either say, that's great, we're accepting that as it is, or they'll say, we have some questions for you around it. In my experience, there's quite a lot of questions. So they want to understand, and often it's the detail of the different of your emissions. So they'll want to go into your scope 1 and 2, and often your scope 3 emissions, to understand how you've broken that down, how you hope to achieve what you've said you were going to achieve. And so that can be quite iterative. It can go backwards and forwards. I find this a bit frustrating sometimes because you can't just pick up the telephone very easily to them, and they might be in a completely different country, in a different time zone, and they will answer your question when they get to it. It's in a pipeline of questions, so you might not get a very fast response. So sometimes that can be quite frustrating, that stage. It can just be a little bit of a misunderstanding. You know, the way that you've described something, it actually meets with the criteria, but because of the way that it's been perceived, they think it doesn't, and you've got to describe these things. So be prepared to do a little bit of work with them at that point. I said I'd talk about fees. So I put a little table together for you for fees for SBTi. I'm going to talk to you about how you can get a discount, but these are the basic fees in dollars on the US dollars on the left and pounds sterling on the right. So it's not cheap to do a set a science-based target. These are the different types. Obviously, financial institutions have to end up having to spend quite a lot of money on this by the nature. But I suppose a basic near-term science-based target for a standard corporate, you're looking at, the best part of $15,000 there. They do charge you to update your target. So if you decide that your target isn't what you want it to be, you will be charged to go back and fix that. And you might decide that you're doing a net zero science-based target instead of the near-term one. It's the same price. And then flag and the other things that we talked about before, they attract a different price, a different cost. At this point, before you pay, but when you pay for it, you'll be published on the website, and back into that portal view that we looked at about 15 minutes ago. You'll be able to see your business on there and what you've agreed to do. The story for SMEs is a lot different. You can go through the corporate route, but I think if you're an SME, you'd probably choose not to on price alone, because there is a flat rate of $1,000 if you're an SME. And then I wanted to tell you about, because this might be relevant to some of you guys. If your business is headquartered in a developing country or economies in transition, and that is as defined by the UN Secretariat's Department for Economic and Social Affairs. So they have some criteria on their website of what constitutes developing countries or an economy in transition. Then you can get a discount off your of the costs of the cost we see here on the screen. Some other criteria are it's got to have a revenue under $1 billion, and if you're an SME, you need a revenue under $10 million. So you need to tell them up front as well, early in the process, that you plan to do this. So you can't come back after you've registered with them. You need to tell them at the start, this is what our plan is, and we want to apply for the discount now. Obviously, they like to encourage you not to do this because it's quite a significant discount, and financial institutions aren't eligible for this. But talking about the revenue under $1 billion. If you are between $1 billion and $250 million, and you meet that you're headquartered in developing countries or an economy in transition, you can get 50% off the price you see here on the screen. And then under $250 million with those criteria, 85% off the price you see here on the screen. Similar for SMEs. SMEs under $10 million, it's 85% discount. So that's definitely something to think about if you go down that route. So here we are. We've set this. We've set our target. We've submitted it. We've paid SBTi all that money. We've got to tell everybody about it now. So the communication bit is the bit that's next. We've done the hard work now. Now you can start telling everybody about it. This can look what you want it to look like. This isn't something that SBTi prescribe. Obviously, they'll give you a media pack with logos and documentation and glossaries and explanations of things that you can use with your clients. But it's up to you to decide what you want to do. You've been published on the website, so you can refer everybody to that. They're usually published on a weekly basis, and they usually come on the website about a month after the target's been validated, unless you agree something else with them. You might want a certain date. So there might be a big corporate day that your business or client wants to get excited about, and you might want to publish it on that particular day. Well, you can organise that with them if you want to. They do say, though, that the target must be made public within 6 months of validation. This is about probably the only criteria they have on it. So you have got to tell the world within 6 months. So I've dragged up one of my own clients. So this is Hair, who are a UK steel company, and you can see they're part of the they have a sectoral target because they're part of the steel sector, very, very high carbon sector, because the amount of carbon that goes into producing steel. But you can see back here, this is when they set they made their commitment back in 2021. It's probably a bit too small to see. They'd made their commitment back in 2021. They said what they were going to do, when they were going to do it by here. So they set that up. There's 49% reduction. They said this 2 years later. So their 24 months had gone by on their little roadmap here, and their targets were validated. And then this shows you the route that they're going to take and what they're going to do over to 2025 to get to their net zero targets. So they've gone down the net zero route because they want to align with what they're doing with their sector. So the steel sector is a net zero target. I mean, essentially what they're doing in that period is removing all of the carbon from the steel production. Oh, I've gone too far. And that's what's going to help them get to their net zero target at the end of it all. They actually took a decision, which I'm not sure is on this, to stop buying carbon credits, to stop buying offsets, which they had been doing. They were talking about the amount of money that they were spending on offsets. Would that be better spent on actually investing in carbon reduction inside the business? So they were spending a lot of money on offsets, and the benefit was a reputational benefit and a communications benefit, but it wasn't doing a single thing for their carbon. So they decided to stop buying carbon credits and start using that money instead on carbon emission reduction projects, which I wholeheartedly support. Okay, so that's the communication side of things. Obviously, this can look like anything. It could be videos. We talked about LinkedIn, you name it, corporate events. And this can be with your clients. This can be with your, suppliers. This can be with your whole value chain. At this point, you probably do want to start talking to your value chain if you haven't already, because if you want to reduce your scope 3 emissions, well, you're going to need to speak to them, because they are the ones who are emitting those scope 3s, and so they're going to need your help to get there. It becomes a collective approach. What's the final bit? Disclosure. So this is 1 minute on this. This goes back to where we started about the greenhouse gas inventory. Well, annually, you're required by Science-Based Target to disclose your progress and your greenhouse gas emissions. This isn't something that you submit to them, but you have to do this yourself. So you will have to report your greenhouse gas emissions every year. You may choose to get them validated or verified by an external organisation and assured externally to give everybody confidence that what you're disclosing is accurate. But you do have to do it. And talking to SBTi, they'll tell you that they will come onto they'll use your corporate communications and check that that's what you're doing. So they might look at your annual reports, they might look at your sustainability reports, they might go on your website, they might look at your CDP disclosure or other voluntary or mandatory disclosures, anything that's publicly available, and make sure that you are not necessarily meeting your target, but that you're disclosing what your performance is. And there is an annex, of course, back in the SBTi website about if you've got any questions about what that needs to look like in order to delight the SBTi, there is some guidance around there. It just aligns with global guidance. So if you're disclosing, say, let's say by CDP, you don't have to worry about whether you're meeting the SBTi's requirements because you're already doing it. Right, I just wanted to do a case study. So I said I would look at Mahindra. I'm just going to have a drink of water. We'll look at Mahindra. So huge company, loads of different subsidiaries. I dare say some of you guys know Mahindra better than I do. There's a little snapshot of what they do. I suppose this case study is a little bit more about Mahindra Limited. So that's the automotive and tractor arm of the whole group, based in India, and it takes action under the Science Based Targets Initiative. It set itself a target. It's one of the country's leading tractor producers, utility vehicle producers. Interestingly, Mahindra, in doing what it does, in working in those sectors, it operates in a really climate sensitive sector, or climate sensitive sectors. So agriculture and manufacturing for agriculture. So its products and even its operations in India have a lot of vulnerability. There's a lot of climate risk facing them, you know, around issues around monsoon. I mean, that's physical risk, but, you know, in terms of transitional risk, in terms of purchasing, you know, and demand from customers, there's water scarcity risks. There is input costs that fluctuate up and down in what they do. And they've got a constantly evolving suite of customer demands and of regulatory requirements that they've got to meet. So they know that the whole climate issue is a big risk to them. Yes, it's a massive opportunity, but it's a big risk. So that's some of the context around there and around their motivation. They know it's an opportunity, and they've decided that they're going to run with it and position, I suppose, sustainability as a wider thing at the heart of what they do. So I think they took 20 of their businesses initially, of the group companies, and then 2018 they said that they got their science-based targets approved. So what does theirs look like? Well, they've got scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas reductions of 47% by 2033. So that's a little less than that graph that we looked at before on the Excel sheet. But that's because they're in a sector that's not as demanding as that one that I showed you. And they've got a scope 3 emissions target of 30% of sold products by unit by the same date, 2033. So in doing that, they know that what they're proposing to do aligns with the Paris Agreement, and they can tell everybody about that. How are they going to do it? Well, they've got all sorts of different ways they said they were going to do it, and the main one is about doubling energy productivity by 2040. So they looked at becoming more energy efficient, which is a super way. You know, the low-hanging fruit, as Naveed will tell you from his energy surveys that he does, that's the easiest one to do. So make themselves more productive by just using less energy. They said they'd integrate renewables as well. So if you see a Mahindra plant, you will notice that there's a lot of solar and wind and other renewables around that, and that they've used other projects as well beyond what they do. So they've saved a lot of money, they've saved a lot of carbon, and are continuing to do so by integrating renewables. Interestingly, they put an internal carbon price on what they do, on their internal investments. So if I work at Mahindra and I'm coming to put a new investment project in, build a new factory, let's say, looking at the slide, well, I've got to work out how much carbon there is related to producing that, to building that factory. And they've currently got a carbon price of $10 per ton of carbon. So that has to be factored in. So the business charge themselves that. And that really drives the business, because it's so huge, to try and find the most low carbon efficient option when they're building a new factory. So that in itself helps to reduce the carbon, because project managers don't want a carbon intensive factory because it's costing them a lot of money from the business. So they look to find ways to innovate and reduce the carbon. And also logistics. That's one of the things that they said they would do. Route optimization, consolidating loads, changing the types of vehicles that they use, electrification, moving to electric vehicles. Not only internally, but also they've helped their supply chain do that as well. So that's really helped reduce their scope 3 emissions. There's a lot of, I mean, they've got a lot of good stuff. You know, the performance has been positive. What do they do about reporting it? Well, their vehicle that they use is CDP. So they use that as their main vehicle for reporting. And CDP, obviously, a very, you know, if you've ever put a CDP submission in, you'll know it's very demanding. There's nowhere to hide in a CDP submission. And so investors know whether when Mahindra have got their CDP submission in there, that they can rely and be confident that what they're asserting is true. So yeah, they're going to continue to do that. They're going to expand renewables. This is what they're looking to be carbon neutral themselves by 2040. They're hoping to not use any offset, but we'll have to see how they get on. They want to bring different fuels into the business, and they want to continue that lower carbon practices that has been so successful with their internal carbon pricing. So yes, I mean, what are the takeaways from it? When I look at what they've done, they've integrated their goals across the whole business. So the carbon targets and the carbon aspirations are integrated with other wider business imperatives. So you're not delivering one at the expense of the other. Doing one delivers everything. That really works. Setting a science-based target in itself just gives that credibility to what they're doing, which really sells it internally and externally. They've aligned with other external organizations like CDP, which gives further credibility. Talk about the carbon pricing, that really nudges the investment towards lower carbon options. I've seen that in other organizations as well. And the reporting that they do, instead of hiding what they're doing or not reporting or been accused of greenwashing or not actually saying anything, that robust reporting, being upfront, explaining what they're doing, it really builds a credibility, and it kind of forces the business to just improve continuously as well. So there's a little bit about Mahindra for you. But obviously, like we were just talking about before, there was another 720 something other Asian businesses that have set a target this year. So there's a lot of case studies out there now. There's a lot of sectors that have already been involved. There's probably some pioneers in sectors, in areas that you guys work in, or that companies that you work for or work within are in. And you can perhaps take some advice and learn take some of the learnings of what they've done as well, closer to home, in specific sectors that are relevant to you. I'm just going to, before we sort of get to wrap up and ask a few questions, because I realise we're getting a bit short on time, just want to talk a bit about some of the benefits of doing this. We've actually probably spoken about most of them already. Some of the best practice things that you see out there, and how it helps to build trust. So it's probably the last main slide. In doing all this, in setting targets, I think one of the main things you do is you reduce risk. You reduce risk. I mean, I've put regulatory risk there, but I think I should probably put wider risk, wider climate risk. If you bring all this to the table, set it all out, comprehensively explain what you're doing to people, you really start to understand your risk, and you start to reduce it as a result of that, because you start to see it and you start to deal with it. You know, an upshot of that is increase investor confidence. You know, I've worked for organizations before, larger corporates, where you have investors ringing you up, asking what you're planning to do on climate change. Why haven't you done so and so yet? What's your target going to be in this particular area? How's your performance be? That investor confidence is a bigger thing and a growing issue. And if you're reporting a science-based target, well, they know that you've really investigated the business and understood what it's all about, and that you are a trusted voice in your own business about where you're going with it, and that they can rely on you and invest in you. We've talked about Mahindra and about operational efficiency and cost savings. I think that's fairly clear now that one thing leads to the other. And all the other things above really grow your brand value. And that's some of the benefits of that. You know, if it's good to be seen to be green, isn't it? I know there's been a bit of pushback lately in different sectors and different countries about this, but there's only been a bit of pushback. I think still we press ahead and we see that on the whole, the vast majority of organizations and investors and customers, the supply chain, they understand that there's a brand value there and want to be associated with those companies and work with them. There's a big benefit for supplier engagement. This is something that really didn't occur to me when I first started working on this. You've got so many scope 3 emissions, most organizations, but they are your value chain scope 1 and 2 emissions. And for you to be able to see some reduction in your scope 3 emissions, you need them to make the reductions. And having that influence on them, understanding the drivers that affect them, why they can't move as fast as you'd like them to, or figuring out ways that they can move more quickly than you want them to or thought they could, really, really helps. And you see a lot of organizations starting to have conversations with suppliers and understanding what they're all about much, much more than they ever did before, just because they're trying to understand scope 3 emissions. In doing all this, you're going to standardize data collection as well. If you start to work with a company or companies that are managing their carbon emissions, you will see that there's a huge diversity in the way that they measure things, manage it, collate the information, save it. It's all over the place, frankly. But in doing this, you've got a standardized data collection. And this helps you to compare and contrast as well against different business units within the business, externally. It's really good. Everybody starts to know what they're doing, makes everybody's life a lot easier internally and externally, and you save a lot of resource and time that way. Up there with enhanced brand value, I'd say one of the other pieces of best practice that you see is, and it's a bit like the standardized data collection, it just drives transparency. And like we talked about the supplier engagement or scope 3 emissions, it gives assurance to third parties. And you can also actually get third-party assurance on this now as well. You can say, can someone come in and just check that we're doing this all in the appropriate way, and you can report accordingly on that. Last thing you probably want to talk about is just aligning your procurement policy with the climate targets. We talked about that at Mahindra, how they align other things and other business imperatives with their actual climate plans. And in doing so, they get 2 for 1, and they make savings there and deliver on both at the same time. You're helping your suppliers, you're building their capacity, you're explaining to them what you need from them, and they realize that you're not the only person and the only customer of theirs asking for these things. So they start to build capacity internally to be able to supply this information to you. And I find that businesses start to work more collaboratively together as well. So larger corporates will start to work with, I've put some examples there that I see, CDP Supply Chain and the SME Climate Hub. So they'll register to be members of groups like that, and they'll attend meetings together, they'll share best practice together, and they'll start to drive more efficiencies that they didn't know about by working together. And sometimes you see them investing in things together and all the organic business benefits that come from that. Okay, I am going to conclude with some last points. If I can get my cursor to work. It's a time commitment, setting a science-based target, and anyone setting down the road, and especially if you've not done something like it before, be aware that there's a lot of technical paperwork behind it, especially in that third step that we talked about, setting the target. It needs some consideration, it needs some time, it needs people who are fluent with, especially with sharing the story of carbon in the business. It needs people who are confident enough to go and challenge the leadership and say, this is what's got to happen and this is why. And it takes a bit of time. And there's some technical know-how there as well, which you might need some support on. Second thing I want to talk about was the concepts of buying offsets versus actually doing some carbon reduction. You know, you can cut your hand and put a bandage on it, but not cutting your hand in the first place is much better. So if you can find a way to avoid buying offsets at all and invest that action, time, and cash into reducing emissions, that is much better outcome for the business, but also, you know, the wider world, the whole reason you're actually doing this in the first place. And my last point about it is there was a reason I put some trees here. There's a in the English language, you're probably familiar with it, the saying, you can't see the wood for the trees. I think there is a risk, especially in scope 3, of chasing data refinements in scope 3, the risk of diminishing returns. So I see whole teams of people trying to refine scope 3 data across supply chains to the nearest kilogram of carbon, and making sure they find every little bit of emission across all of the different nooks and crannies in the supply chain. It's good, but just take time to make sure that you're not doing that at the expense of actually finding reductions. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to say if anyone wants to ask any questions. I'm way over time. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, thank you very much, Damien. I think it was an incredible session. A round of applause for you, Damien. And yes, you do deserve a drink, so take your time. And in the meantime, in the meantime, of course, I think there were a few hands raised as you were going through. So you are all welcome. And I think Tanvir or someone will handle the questions. But thank you very much, Damien. Fantastic.
So any questions, anyone?
Thank you very much. That was excellent one, Damien. What I would like to ask, there are two things. Number one, what are the tangible benefits for setting SBTi for a small consultancy firm? Number one. Or second one is, and how does SBTi support micro or SME businesses in consultancy? So if you can please have a light on that.
Okay, so for a consultancy business, it depends how big the consultancy is, really, I suppose. If you're McKinsey or some global consultancy like that, I can absolutely see why that would be a fabulous thing for you to do. You know, you're a big enough organization with a huge footprint, and you're the same as any other business. So go for it. If you're a smaller consultancy or a very small consultancy, then figure out whether it's going to be, I think you need to be realistic about it and decide whether it's going to be worth your time, because it is a big time. You'll probably need a small team, only a handful of people, 1 or 2 people, but it's taking people away from the day job in a consultancy. It's not earning any fees at that point for a few months whilst people work through these things. Ask yourself, are there more effective ways for you to use your time around managing carbon? So it may be that a small business, like a really small consultancy, can set its own targets, can use the tools, but maybe that are on the SBTi website, set themselves a target that works for them, but maybe not necessarily go through the process of getting it validated. Because obviously you then avoid the fees, which are substantial, but you get some of the benefit of understanding what it is you want to do. So, I mean, the benefit, of course, you can talk about it externally, but your supply chain, your customers, you might get less benefit from saying that you're SBTi registered or validated as a very small consultancy as, say, a larger company would, because they've got that much more coverage and exposure in the economy than a small consultancy would. So my advice would be probably to use the tools, set the target, but don't necessarily get it validated.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
agree, Damien. I agree, Damien.
Yeah.
And I would say, just to add, unless there's a supply chain pressure, it's a requirement from your customer, then you can't avoid it. Otherwise, the next option could be that you can look for some alternatives, such as there are some other free of cost platforms available where you can disclose, you can use their tools to work out your carbon footprint. So that could be an alternative way, as Damien rightly mentioned. If there's no return on this investment, the time effort that you're thinking about, there's no point going for it unless there's a regulatory or customer requirement.
Thanks, Naveed and Damien. Now, Rahil, can you ask the question? Rahil?
I will take the opportunity. Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, there are quite a lot of organizations, and as a micro consultancy, we are a net zero pledged with them. So I agree with that. Whilst taking on the same point, there is a B Corp, there's a SBTi. When we see the fees is involved or something, so most of the consultancies, they can't afford, as Darren said, that it depends like what your turnover is, what the size of the consultancy is. Yeah, thank you very much for that.
No
Joyce,
problem.
Rahil, not sure, but
Okay.
you are on mute. So you can unmute yourself and then ask the question.
Yeah, if not Rahil, then Muhammad Faisal. Maybe they can't unmute themselves.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
And Damien, thank you so much for the brief session. My question is, I would like to ask what if an industry choose not to formally register with the SBTi program, but it still adopts the SBTi principles to effectively reduce its emissions on their own timelines or maybe the international timelines. So how can we follow this criteria?
Well, you can easily, thanks for the question. So you can easily, the documentation for SBTi is freely available on their website. Everybody can access it. Everything that I've showed you today, you can go onto the SBTi website and download. And in fact, there's loads more. I just tried to show you the high level key documents and resources. But there's so much more on there. So you can easily go on there and figure out how to set your own target and go ahead and set your own target without getting validated. But some organizations will see the benefit in been publicly recognized for that, or it may be that there's an imperative that they need to be validated with the SBTi. So what I see with some clients these days is, there's a lot of reasons why people want to reduce their carbon emissions, but increasingly I see a lot of people wanting to reduce their emissions because of reasons of procurement. So especially if they're going for maybe a government contract, certainly in Europe, if they're going for a government contract, there's a lot of criteria around explaining what your emissions are now, explaining wider sustainability and how you're meeting those criteria. And they might say, well, they do say, we need you to be, say, disclosed with CDP, for example. I haven't seen an example of anyone being asked to disclose with SBTi yet, but there was a time a few years ago when I've never seen anyone asked to disclose through CDP either. So these things can change and do change. And so there is a benefit. There may be wider benefits. There are wider benefits, but there may be imperatives why you've got no choice but to do it. But you can easily go online, get the tools, get the guidance, go through the process without actually validating your target.
Yeah, and I think just to add, you have to be careful with the communication and disclosure because you have to be very careful. Though you are aligned with the SBTi, you have used your tools, but you haven't been through the SBTi itself, so they don't recognize you. So that's where I think the language difference should come into play, so that the your clients or the customers, they know that you are following their tools, you are following their process, the methodology, but you are not accredited or verified by them.
Yeah, thank you. Rahil?
Yes, sir. My question is, we have submitted our commitment letter in June 2023, but after that, 24 months have passed away. But what should I do now?
June 20, so that's 2 years.
Yeah.
I think, well, you need to write to them, Rahil. Before the end of this month, you've got about a week. I would write to them and tell them, just explain to them what you're doing and why, explain the reasons why you've not got it ready yet. They're not awkward people, they're not difficult people. They want you to succeed. So explain what you're doing, and importantly, I would explain what the next what you plan to do. So let's say you can get the target ready in 3 months. Well, tell them that and set out what it is you're going to do. So we've got 3 things we're going to do. In July, we're going to do this. In August, we're going to do this. And in September, we're going to do this and submit it. Something like that. So explain why and explain what you're going to do. But I would do it before the deadline.
Okay, sir. Okay, then. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And the last one is compliance. I can't see the name, but it says compliance.
Thank you so much. This is Akhtar Ali from Maheen Textile. I have just one question from Damian. Should we submit a consolidated commitment for our group of companies through the portal, through one portal, or it is recommended to submit individual commitments for each company to ensure clarity and specifically?
So Mahindra, the example that we saw there, they did it separately. So it depends as well. Let's say you've got a bunch of businesses. They might be in different sectors within the same group. So if you've got I'll just for the sake of making the point, if you've got a business that says, I don't know, a coal mining business versus an agricultural business versus a textile business in the same group, they're going to fall under different sectors within the SBTi target setting process. So you can't put them all in one. I would recommend that you look in the guidance around this. And if you've got any questions,
So thank you so much
this is what it's for.
your comments on this.
Yeah, email them, send them a message and explain the situation, and be clear what the issue is, that you've got different subsidiaries doing different things. Should we do it together or separately? I think they'll ask you to do it separately.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I saw Murli's hand. Murli, if you still here, if you have any questions, you can ask.
Yeah, I just had one question about the acquisition. Sometimes the investors take over companies who have submitted their targets to SBTi. And in the larger context, will this target get itself diluted when the investor itself is a huge company, or should they have to recalculate? Again, it is pushing the target by another 2 years' time. What is the criteria SBTi follows under those conditions to ensure stringency of achieving the target? I hope I'm clear.
You are clear. Yeah, that is set out in the guidance. I'll be honest, I don't know what the specific criteria in terms of percentage changes or the amount of carbon is off the top of my head, but I know they're set out. It may be that you have to restate your target if that's the case, and that you have to, or it may be that you're absorbed into the bigger business, and if appropriate, it may be you don't have to do anything, and you can dissolve your target and say we're part of this organization now. My advice again is to be on the front foot with SBTi, explain to them as soon as you can what's happening, write to them and ask them for some advice, because the reason there's so much documentation on the SBTi website is because no two companies are the same. Everybody's different, facing a different situation, and sometimes, as comprehensive as that advice is on the website, sometimes you just have to ask them, and it might be that they've never seen that situation before and they have to take a brand new view on something.
Thank you.
And I think from my on that note, from my experience, I'm more inclined towards the recalculating your targets, because greenhouse gas protocol and ISO 14064 encourages you to recalculate your baseline. So if you are going towards the assurance, actually you can't get it assured. They will send you back saying you have to recalculate your baseline because you have to measure the difference. If you are in acquisition, you can't actually measure the difference. So that's where probably then SBTi would also encourage you to go and redo it, because you can't get it assured otherwise.
Okay, thanks, Naveed. Thanks, Damien. I think we have all the questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. So our team have taken your details. So we will email you certificates of attendance one by one within a week. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, any queries, then feel free to contact us. We have local offices in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So if you want to talk to any of our team members over there, you can talk to them. If you want to send any messages directly in UK, you can share with us. And obviously, if there are any queries, then Damien and Naveed will be more than happy to support you in anything. But once again, many thanks, Damien, for your time. Many thanks, Naveed. And thanks to everyone for attending.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.